I'm going to steal his thunder a little bit because I was able to go to Israel as well, and I actually got to spend a semester there. And one of the coolest stories that I can get out of the Holy Land that I ever did, it has nothing to do with anything that was built or anything that was there. We were actually having class in Caesarea Philippi, which in the Colosseum, which already there, that's a pretty amazing story. However, as we were doing class, this Asian group came in, and they came onto the floor of the Colosseum while we were sitting there, and they began singing this last song in their language, and I honestly don't know if it was Chinese or Korean. But then this African group came out as well, and they joined them in singing How Great Thou Art in their language. And then the Asian lady, I remember the leader, looked at us, and she beckoned us to sing, and so we started singing How Great Thou Art in English. And so, as all three groups were singing, it was just reminding me of what heaven's really going to be like. You know, all tribes and all tongues and all nations are going to be worshiping the Lord. And so, this song has always been special since then, because that's the closest to heaven that I've ever been. And this is the closest to heaven that we're ever going to be, is when we're worshiping the Lord.
So a rabbi, a monk, and a Christian walk into an airport, and they all have to wait in the same ridiculous line. Where else are you going to see that? That was
It was pretty incredible.
our second wait to come home, and it just needed a picture, and it's...
I said, I feel like I should take a picture of that, and he's like, so go ahead. It was interesting.
Yeah, that was just...
And a cowboy.
Yeah, it was crazy. So, you know, and that's the weird thing is there's, y'all know we're talking about Israel. For those of you new, Heather and I just spent 9 days in the Holy Land, and with Chaz being gone, he asked us to share it with you. And so we're gonna try and compress 9 days worth of amazing things into some small amount of time this morning, and then at the end I'll kind of try and draw it all together and maybe show you why this is important. And Sean, that was not stealing my thunder. That was an awesome story. Thank you. And there are so many stories like that from that place. And I don't know that it's the place, it is God's land, but when you get Jesus people flocking from all over the world, just amazing things happen. Thank you for that, Sean.
Yeah, that was phenomenal.
So, that was just the lead in. So we flew in to Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv. It's the 70th anniversary of the founding of the nation of Israel, so they were flashing Star of Davids all over the control tower, and it was cool.
It was impressive. Their 70th anniversary flags everywhere.
Yeah, all up and down all the streets. Sorry, the technical disconnect here is I'm working on two screens, not the one in front of me. So we spent our first night in Netanya, which is just north of Tel Aviv. Beautiful city on the Mediterranean. The weather was not with us for the first few days, but that was the view of the city of Netanya.
It's a pretty nice thing to wake up to, because we came in the dark. So
yeah,
waking up going, wow.
So we got in buses that morning, and we headed up the coast, Mediterranean coast, north to Caesarea by the sea. This was one of the palaces of Herod. It also, it's amazing. I got some better close-up pictures. But this is kind of a general overall. Over to the left here is the amphitheater, and over to the right is the hippodrome. And I'll explain more of those when we get to it. In case you were wondering how they went to the bathroom in the old days, this was an ancient loo. One cheek on each stone, and I suddenly realized why togas were so important back then. Because wearing pants would just be a completely different experience in this setting. So
That was always everybody's first question is where we're going is where are the bathrooms? And so our tour guide, every
Right
time
here.
we went somewhere that had examples of ancient water closets, as they call them over there, she made sure to point that out.
And it's right there at the entrance to the
Yes.
hippodrome, so there's no private stalls, no. It's just, thus the importance of the toga.
Right.
So this is the hippodrome. Hippodrome is where they race chariots and horses. The stands, we gathered up here in the stands for a teaching.
It was remarkable.
Here's a wider shot of the hippodrome. They would just race around and crash into each other, and Spartacus. This is,
Picture Ben-Hur.
yeah.
Everybody seen Ben-Hur? There you go.
This section off in the distance there, those buildings, on my second trip, it was in that area that they believed the Apostle Paul was kept for 2 years while they were trying to decide what to do with him. This area really has a lot of significance biblically. I believe this is also the point where Luke was based while he was with Paul, and from here he made his trips into Jerusalem and Galilee, which are actually very close to here relatively, to do all the interviews that resulted in the Gospel of Luke.
It was amazing to me, coming from here, in Pueblo, we have so many buildings that are on the National Historic Register. We've got nothing on this. This is like 3,000, 4,000 years old in some cases. And these are original stones, a lot of them. And the nice thing about the tours is they're very sure to tell you what's original and what's rebuilt, so you know. And so much of this was original that they have unearthed. It was shocking to me. So it makes me want to be an archaeologist.
The stands of the hippodrome. This is Herod's palace. What's left of it, including that little thing there, that was his pool. This guy had it going on. He had a pool overlooking the ocean. I mean, just amazing. And you can see some of the old mosaic tile work is still in existence. I mean,
Stunning.
when you got slave labor and you don't have to pay people to do stuff, you can get amazing things done. You can get guys with little colored pebbles, scraping them till they're square on four sides and setting them into mortar. Slave labor is awesome if you can get it. Okay, here's kind of a big highlight. This stone it's actually a representative. This was the first, and I'm not sure, it may be the only proof that Pontius Pilate ever existed. For years and years, doubters and scoffers of the Bible, there was no account of Pontius Pilate. He didn't exist until they found this plaque with his name on it.
That was, for me, one of the big highlights of this trip was everybody is out to disprove the Bible. And I think you said it best. We can disprove the Bible, only for a short period of time. Because from there, God will always make known what the truth was. And when they come across finds like this, who can argue? So it seems like every single time something is disproven in the Bible, within a reasonable period of time, they will find an artifact that totally proves the Bible true. And we had honestly the most amazing tour guide I could have ever prayed for. She was not only an expert in Israel history, world history, but biblical history as well. And she was so good at pointing out those things. You know, this is what they said, but here's what we found. And so you can trust the Bible. I should have kept count of how many times she said that.
Yeah, you're stealing all the thunder for the end of the message, so preach it.
What's that body of water there?
That's the Mediterranean. This is the amphitheater, the one that Sean just spoke about. It's awesome and amazing, and the acoustics there are just incredible. And without amplified sound,
And as you can see by the black big tarp thing, they still use it as an amphitheater. They were getting ready for a concert that night.
here's looking down into it. Another significant event here was up in the stands, and I don't know if I included another picture of the stand. No, I didn't. In Acts, Herod, one of the Herods, went out and the crowd started worshiping him as God, and he got worms and died. That happened here, and our guide was showing us the sun coming down over the Mediterranean and in the white silvery robes that he would have been wearing, and they showed us the king's seat, his special box. I bet he had his own loo up there, but the sun coming in would have just lit him up, and it was this thing that people started praising him as God, and he was part Jew and he knew better, and God took him out, and that happened at this place. So from there, we traveled to further north to Megiddo. You would probably know this by the American term Armageddon. It's Tel Megiddo. In Hebrew, it would be pronounced Har Megiddo, and when it got transliterated into English, it became Armageddon. And we know this mostly from its significance in Revelation, and this is the site of the final battle. But this place has such an incredible, huge, long history. It's called a tell. In ancient times, when you had a good piece of land, you'd build a town, a fortress, a city, and then there'd be a war and they'd wipe it out. Well, rather than scraping it and starting over again, they would just throw dirt on top of it and build another layer. And then you get these giant hills, and it's called a tell. Megiddo, they found 27 layers. 27 times this has been rebuilt. And we had I think when we get a little further in, this is the walkway to the gates up the tell to the gates of the city.
Boy, was it raining that day.
Yeah, we got rained on. Those are the actual gates to one of the incarnations of Megiddo. Houses, storehouses, there was everything here. Tons of excavation going on there. This is also where Solomon put his northern stables for his northern chariot forces. Something he was not supposed to do because God said don't multiply horses and don't have a whole lot of... But this is where his disobedience was. I believe this is the actual stable area.
Yes.
oops, a little too fast. More of the ruins. It's just incredible. We could actually have spent a lot longer than we did there, but when you're getting rained on, they just kind of cut it short, and it was so muddy. But here's the incredible view from this tell. Again, the rain and the haze made it kind of hard to see, but in the distance, off to the far left would be Nazareth. So Jesus growing up would have overlooked, this is called the Jezreel Valley. It is probably the most productive agricultural land in all of the Middle East, if not most of the world. And not too long ago, it was swamps. And the Jewish people have come back and they planted trees in the mountains and changed the whole, and they planted eucalyptus trees to suck up the water out of the swamps. And it was a fulfillment of prophecy. God said it would happen, and it did, and it's happening. But in the distance, Nazareth is over here, and you also have Mount Tabor, which is where Jonathan and Saul were killed in the battle. It was in the Jezreel Valley that Gideon defeated the Midianites. And when you look at this, and you see this rich agricultural land, this is the same valley that Revelation said will be bridle high with blood at the final battle. And when you look over it and see how lush and beautiful and amazing this land is, you suddenly start to realize why this will be the final battle place. The world's going through tribulation, and there's fire and hailstones and destruction everywhere, but God will continue to bless Israel. This will be the last fertile ground on earth, and every army in the world will want it, and they'll converge on it to take it, and that's when Jesus comes back. And again, off in the distance, Mount Tabor and just the beautiful, lush green valley. Off to this direction is Mount Carmel. We're going to go there in a minute, but it's just an amazing view. Even better when it's not all cloudy. This is one of my favorite stops, actually. So from there, we traveled north and west. I always get that. To Mount Carmel. And of course, the Catholics got there first and built a monastery and put up a really awesome statue of Elijah. This is the place where Elijah took on the prophets of Baal and whooped them. Fire from the sky. This is what... Yeah. And this is a view from on top of the monastery, on top of Mount Carmel. Megiddo would be off over in here somewhere. This also shows, with the way the mountains are shaped, we had an awesome guide, David, and Megiddo was literally at the crossroads of the ancient world. The way the mountains are shaped and the deserts are, the trade routes between Africa, Asia, Europe, or Asia Minor, and Africa, all went through here, and they've been battling over Megiddo forever, and that's why they build a city, it gets wiped out, and they build another one. It's just amazing, amazing history in this area.
We had 200 people on this tour, so we had 4 buses, so we had 4 different tour guides, and at different stops we got to hear teachings from each of them. So that was really awesome.
Yeah, David was really knowledgeable, and most of them, I can't speak for 2 of them, but 2 of them, at least 2 of them were Messianic Jews and believers, and it was so awesome to get their perspective on things. From there, actually, this is the next day, isn't it? Yeah, we started the next day at the Mount of Beatitudes. Again, Catholics got there first. And put up what actually is a beautiful chapel.
It's beautiful.
Really beautiful. This is the site where Jesus in Matthew 5, 6, and 7 gave the Sermon on the Mount. And the acoustics there are amazing. So you can, the natural, it overlooks the Sea of Galilee, so you can actually, envision Jesus there teaching and all these people on the mountain, and it's just beautiful. And the Sea of Galilee looks even more amazing without all the clouds. Pastor Raul Reese from Calvary Chapel, Golden Springs, a Calvary Chapel original, led the tour, and he was giving a teaching. They have a little amphitheater set up, Jesus style. No, it was good. From there, we traveled to, as Chaz has enlightened us, Capernaum. This is the city that became Jesus' home base throughout, after he was kind of, I don't want to say run out, but not accepted in Nazareth. He actually took his whole family, and they settled in Capernaum. This is also the home of James and John and Andrew and Peter. Again, Catholics got there first, threw up a statue, and that's a statue of St. Peter. This, another favorite spot. This is the shore. We'll see the city in a minute. But Peter, Andrew, James, and John, they were all fishermen. And they would go out into the Sea of Galilee and catch their fish and come back. And Jesus found them drying their nets on the shore. This is the shore, right next to their hometown. Jesus walked here. We know it. Jesus called 4 of his apostles from this shore. Walking here, you are literally walking in the footsteps of Jesus. It's amazing to stand there on that shore and know that just 2,000 years ago, he was there. It's amazing. There are a lot of places where we think things happen, and it's not always important that it's the exact spot, but there are a few places like this where it is the exact spot. And you just know I'm walking in the footsteps of Jesus. The Catholic shrine, it was built over what they believe to be the house of the Apostle Peter. It was in this house that people were brought to who were sick, and Jesus healed them. This is also where Peter, I get those two P's messed up. Where Peter's mother-in-law was healed. The guides told a story that they think it was the healing of Peter's mother-in-law that caused Peter to deny Jesus 3 times, but that's just speculation. Hey, the guides told me that story.
Our guides had some great senses of humor.
They had some great stories.
Awesome story.
They couldn't build on it, so they told some story, but there's pylons, and this chapel sits up over it, and then there's glass floors, and they can stand over it in the chapel and look down, and they're very exclusive about who they let in that chapel. I snuck in there a couple years ago, but...
They were doing a mass that day, so we weren't
Yeah.
allowed to go in.
This is directly to the left. You can just see part of the chapel still up there. So these are the homes and buildings and shops between Peter's house, and then on the left here is the synagogue.
You think some of our subdivisions have houses that are so close together?
Yeah.
That's the thing.
You ain't seen
They've always
nothing
done
yet. Talk about a shared wall.
Oh,
It's
really? And they did that on purpose for that reason.
yeah.
Fortified.
That's a whole wall you don't have to build if you just glom onto somebody else's place. So, and when you're hauling these big rocks up out of the,
Right.
having a wall pre-built's a good thing. More of the city and the synagogue in the background. This is the interior. Now, this is actually, there was one of the original synagogue that was here was torn down, and so they took a synagogue from another town and brought it over here and reconstructed it on the site. But if you see, can you see the line there? You see the new white stone and then the black stone? The stone in that area is all volcanic and basalt and very dark, and what was brought in was marble. But that black line, that's the original floor of the original temple. That is where Jesus taught. That is where Jesus silenced the demon that was in the man and trying to out him, and he's like, zip it. And that happened here. This is for sure. We know this. Jesus taught on that floor in that temple. Capernaum is a really awesome, special place. Jesus used the illustration of a millstone being tied around someone's neck and thrown. This is what a millstone looks like, and these are actually small ones.
Very small.
So the round ones, this was kind of a base, and they would put the grain in there, and then someone would walk around, and the stick would be levered into the middle, and the stone would roll over and grind the grain. And so that's a millstone. And when Jesus said, have one, yeah, you're going straight to the bottom. These are capstones and decorations from the original temple, and it was amazing.
The detail work in those is phenomenal. I guess that's
Yeah.
what you can do when you don't have the internet.
And slave labor.
And slave labor.
And slave labor. Just incredible detail on the capstones. And
Oh, yeah. This is the
go with this, because you heard this better than me.
temple on wheels. Tell me
They
so
think
the guide was telling us, even back then, they knew that they were supposed to be the light and take the word out of the synagogue and not just keep it there. So this was a depiction of the synagogue on wheels. In other words, take it, go. That one hit me. I like that.
from there, we went to, some people call it the Jesus boat. There's no evidence or anything that Jesus was in this boat, but when they found it, it dates from the time of Christ. And this is on a kibbutz, which is a Jewish communal farm that are all over the place. And they built this museum here for it. And unfortunately, nobody actually took a picture of the boat.
Uh-oh.
It's not a whole lot to see, yeah. And I didn't have time to dig through previous trips. So we're going from the boat museum out to take a ride out on the Sea of Galilee, and everywhere there's these catfish, and I think they're going to be there forever because Jews don't eat catfish. And so I'm wondering what's going to happen to all these maybe they'll start, catching them and exporting them to the Gaijim. I don't know. It's just, but everywhere. We went out walking on the lake one night, and you can just see them everywhere. It's big old catfish, and nobody's going to eat them. This is one of the little wooden boats that you see all over the place. People are putzing around on the mostly tourists, because real fishermen are in real boats. But that's for, you could probably get 10, 15, 20 people on there max total. And when you got 200, you need a bigger boat. That's one of the bigger wooden boats, and that's our boat back in the back, the
Like a big ferry boat.
big one.
Giant.
And that's
Like that.
everybody gathered on the deck of the giant ferry boat. It was supposed to be a wooden boat ride, but the only thing wooden in there was nothing. I can't think if there was anything
The
wooden.
dock that we walked on. I
Yeah.
don't know. But it
But
was
we had a
incredible
nice
to have
teaching.
A teaching right on the sea.
Yeah,
It was remarkable.
Ryan Reese, Rawls' son, taught there. Very nice personal message. Really enjoyed it. Okay, so we're out on the sea, and there's a series of 3 pictures here. And David, one of the 2 guides, says, stand in the boat and put your hand here, point towards this landmark, and then put your other one here, pointing towards this landmark. Right now, between your hands is where 70% of Jesus' ministry took place.
It was awesome.
It was just
We're
mind-blowing
trying to figure
to
out why he
think.
kept having the boat captain, we're sitting still, and then the boat starts to go, and he keeps doing this, and the boat's turning a little, and then it stops, and
Yeah, we had Jesus' ministry right in our hands. It's just amazing to think that these are all the shores that he and the disciples trod up and down, back and forth for 3 years. It was just amazing. This is the city of Tiberias. It's the largest city, one of the capital cities of the area. I can't remember which one of the Herods didn't like Sephora being the capital, so he built a new one here. It's grown up into, it's mostly hotels and small houses
Yeah.
and a little bit of shopping.
yeah,
And
all up on the ridge is all homes.
And that little thing with the little bit of blue and the smoke coming up off of it, we're actually heading that way because we're going to have a St. Peter fish lunch on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. And there is the St. Peter fish lunch. There's not a
Yes,
whole
I
lot
ate
of
it.
there's not a whole lot of prep work that goes into it. Gut it, dip it, drop it.
There you go.
Throw it on the plate and put it in, and they get a lot of them out. And yes, Heather did eat it.
I did.
I went for something else.
It was a lot like crab legs. It was a whole lot of work for not a lot of meat. So, yeah, we ate after we ate.
I actually did try a bite of it, and it wasn't.
It was actually it was tilapia.
Yeah.
It's not anything really crazy or foreign. It's just tilapia, just with a face.
There were some other pictures taken that we're not going to share, but yeah.
It was good.
Just a beautiful view of the Sea of Galilee. I think this is actually our next day.
I'll tell you, as rainy as it was, and this was unprecedented for them to have this kind of weather this time of year. Usually the rainy season stopped about 3 weeks ago, and I don't know if you had planned to tell them that or not. We had, actually on the way back that night, I think. So while we were on the Sea of Galilee, it had rained all morning, and then while we were out on the sea, nothing. It cleared up. I mean, it didn't clear up completely because it was still real cloudy, hazy, but it was completely calm. There was no wind. It was like God just gave us that time for the
Just
teaching.
a little window.
And as we pulled in to the place to have the fish lunch, like the last person made it up the ramp and just it all let loose again. So we ate inside while it was coming down, and then on the way home that night, it was a hailstorm, and I took pictures of the people in the shops taking pictures out on the street because there were branches down, and just the street in front of our hotel was flooded. People were having to go around it. It was flooded. And actually that night, it's the desert, so there's not a lot of rain. And so when they do get a lot of rain.
Well, not
like
up here. This is all, yeah.
Down further, we had to actually take a different route to the Dead Sea because the road was washed out, and there had been 10 kids that were hiking where they shouldn't have been hiking, didn't watch the weather storm, that were killed that night in that rainstorm.
Yeah, she announced that this morning. This is the next morning, and
It was
asked for
pretty
prayers for the nation.
So we were there in sort of an unprecedented time, but God gave us that little window just so we could have that teaching. It was really beautiful.
Yeah, and they were asking us to come back because they'd like to get more of that rain. So
I don't know what's with you people, but you brought the rain.
yeah, Yeah, so we had some sun this morning, and it
was
was
amazing.
it almost as beautiful as it actually is on a full sunny day. And it's called the Sea of Galilee, but
The lake.
yeah, their perspective, I guess, was a little different back then because it's just a really big lake. It's I'm from Michigan with the Great Lakes, and so it's not even that. You can see the other side. If you can see the other side, I mean, come on. That's a pond by Michigan standards, but Colorado, that would be a really good lake. So, on our way up to where we're ultimately going, we passed the ruins of the city of Magdala, and I'm not going to fully talk about that right now because it'll steal all the thunder from my conclusion. But Magdala is the city of Magdala, where Mary Magdalene was from. We're heading up way north towards the Golan. This is the northern portion of the Jordan River. Again, the Sea of Galilee, just a big lake. It's actually a fat spot in the Jordan River. The Jordan River flows into it, flows out the other side. This is the northern portion of the sea of the Jordan River.
I think I expected the Mississippi,
Yeah,
and it was a little less than the Arkansas.
yeah. As rivers go,
And that was pretty high for this time of year. She said ordinarily it would just be a trickle. So.
in this northern portion, just amazing, more agricultural land. What the Jewish people have been able, what God through the Jewish people has done to this land to make it productive. They're growing mangoes and oranges and lemons and limes. They are the major importer or exporter of fruits and vegetables to Europe. Most of the fresh fruits and vegetables you get in Europe now are coming from Israel. Not only are they feeding all of their own people, but they're exporting it. Bananas, oh my gosh, the bananas were everywhere, and they're tented in bananas, and in between you've got rows of wheat, and we saw corn, and
Barley.
they've become amazing with their water conservation. Drip agriculture was invented by the Jewish people, and now we see it everywhere today. When you only got a little bit of water, you learn to use it and use it well. And when you get it right to the plant, you're not losing, the majority of it to evaporation. It's just amazing. Everywhere you look, just fruits and vegetables, fruits and vegetables. We made our way to Tel Dan, which is also a nature reserve. This is beautiful. This is amazing. We could do a whole day on just this. Tel Dan Nature Reserve, and we're going to go through kind of the nature preserve to the ruins. This is also the headwaters of the Jordan River. There's just water flowing everywhere, up out of the ground, up out of the rocks, and it's delicious, by the way. We were told not to drink it. They got this thing about animals walking in water or pooping or something, and I'm like, it just came out of the ground, and so I scooped some up, and it was delicious. This is the trail we took through. The growth is just so lush. It's almost a jungle.
Yeah.
Everywhere you look, water flowing up out of the ground, and all this making its way into the Jordan River, Sea of Galilee.
You can see why the tribe of Dan chose it, even though they weren't supposed to.
Yeah, the beautiful rapids and water, it was just gorgeous. More of the water flowing up out of the ground. It's just crazy, just water just bubbling up out of the ground. This is a fig leaf. I don't know what Adam and Eve were thinking. I really don't.
I mean, they were like
'Cause
this, really,
and
but
very
still.
fuzzy, scratchy too. I mean, that might have been the curse, is that they used fig leaves, because I don't know what they were thinking. God coming up with some animal skins was definitely a merciful thing, because you do not want this rubbing against your bum. It's just,
Oh, and the smell of figs was thick.
Yeah.
I mean, you could practically cut the air with a knife. It was just permeated. It was. Some
yeah, and they
people
grow
like it.
wild all over the place. But so now when you think of Adam and Eve, you got a picture in your mind of what a fig leaf looks like,
That big.
and it was not a smart move. They were not thinking. Heather made a friend.
I did.
And this is just in the middle of the woods. It's just crazy. This isn't
they
the
were
seashore.
everywhere.
This is the middle of the woods. Wood crabs. It's crazy.
Did not expect that.
And we're making our way to ancient Dan, the city of Dan. This is where the tribe of Dan, who was supposed to get the area where the Philistines were, but didn't trust God and didn't believe him and didn't go in and take the land. And so they're like, we got to find some place that we can. And so they traveled up north and they found some very nice and kind and peaceful people. And so they went up there and they slaughtered them all and took over the land. When the northern kingdom separated from the southern kingdom, this is also one of two places where the northern king set up a golden calf. They've actually made a frame outline of where and I'm not sure why they did this. This actually bugs me a little bit, why you would even set up the frame for an altar to an idol. But they set up one of the golden calves there, and of course the reason for that was they were afraid if the people from the north continued to go to Jerusalem to worship, that they'd want to stay part of the southern tribes, and it was bad news all the way around. And you know, that's why God took these guys out too. Let them be taken out. Another view of the altar, and we gathered up on these steps and had a teaching here. It really was incredible, but I don't
Sad
know,
at the same
sad,
time.
incredibly
Very,
sad. Thank you.
know, You're excited to see the ruins, and it's so neat to see the history, but to know why it's there, and to know that they just didn't trust God enough. You know, you'd seen the success of the tribes all around. Why would they not trust God to give them success where he sent them? And so they just took the easy road and went off a completely wrong direction.
And here's the contrast of the nation of Israel. Directly around the corner from this, you literally, maybe 30, 40 yards,
Maybe.
is this installation for battle, modern battle. One of the wars, we heard about so many, I'm
There were so
scrambling
many
a little.
battles, recent battles, that we were taught about. I don't remember which one. In the 80s.
This is actually right on the Lebanese border. So either the 6-day war, the 10-day war, or the 7-day war, they built fortifications here in these foxholes, and I know there's
how
a name
funny-
for these.
Any of you ever been to the Four Corners? And you're like, oh, I'm standing in 4 states. I can see Kansas. I can see, or wherever that is. I guess New Mexico, and yeah. That's kind of how I felt in a lot of these places, because right where we're standing, we're in Israel. Right where you're looking is Lebanon. Right there.
I got
No
some more
big
pictures of that.
fanfare.
That village you can see off in the distance, that is a Lebanese village.
Yes.
The line, that road that you see there, that's where the soldiers would drive. The border for Lebanon is right there. That's also a Hezbollah village.
Yes.
Hezbollah's deep in there. They're the ones that hate Israel, and they all hate Israel over there. You know, they've set up there, and it's supposed to be demilitarized, and you know,
It's not.
the UN is useless,
Yeah.
and so they're just waiting. They're just storing up weapons and biding their time.
It was interesting as we were being told where to look to see these things, that they said, and yes, you're being looked at right now. We're watching them, but they're watching you too, so Be nice.
And you know, I never felt unsafe a day we
No,
were there.
never.
Never once.
It was just an interesting feeling of, wow, this is real. This is, well, the stuff you hear on the news is actually happening still. It's not done. It's still there.
But so much of what you hear on the news is literally created for the news.
Yeah.
They go out and make things happen so that it'll get on the news. So it really is propaganda. So much of what happens over there is on so much smaller a scale than you think it is, and they blow it up and they make it seem this big thing. And then some of them are just done for the publicity. It's crazy.
Just to keep it in the news.
Take everything you see on the news about Israel with a huge, gigantic tablespoon of salt. It's fake news, as somebody once said.
And it's interesting to hear that from Israeli citizens. Like, we watch the news too, and we're like, where did you get that?
Yeah, they're like, what demonstration?
did not-
That was 5 people. That was 5 people. And it made news around the world. It was,
Startling.
so that's it. Slightly closer view of the Hezbollah Lebanese village. Also off in the distance, I just like doing that. Also off in the distance is Mount Hermon.
Yes.
And Israel owns or has possession of part of that.
7%?
No, it was bigger than that. No, I thought it was bigger than that. Anyway, and Mount Hermon figures very big in several areas of the Bible, especially the Old Testament. It's a close-up of Mount Hermon.
With the lookout towers on the top.
I got ahead of myself. I hate that. And then also as part of the Hermon mountain range, Nimrod's castle,
Oh, yes.
the remains of it are up there. We didn't get to go up there.
It's a long hike.
Yeah, we did a lot of
We did
walking.
a lot of walking. Around 20,000 steps a day. For those of you that are thinking about going, start walking now. Get yourself ready. There were a lot of people who were not prepared, including me. I wore great shoes. I'm very smart about those things, and I still got a blister on my toe. But no, there were a lot of people that had to stay back for a day because their feet just couldn't take it. So
Yeah,
seriously,
especially
if
when
you're
we got to
considering going for
Jerusalem.
the 6 months ahead of time, really need to start doing a lot of walking and preparing your body for that. Like, I think the 2 biggest days were like almost 8 miles that we walked. That
I
was
don't know.
us, though.
I have to live in ignorance of those things. Or else.
I have a thing on my phone.
Yeah, I'm not into that slavery. Now, also, as part of this, just around the corner, just a little ways around from the war installation and the dam, this is amazing.
Phenomenal.
In Genesis, and I looked it up last night, in Genesis, I want to say 23, where Lot is taken during the war against Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham hears about it, and he gets his posse together, and they chase him. They chased him as far as the city of Dan. This is the city gates
It's the actual
of
city.
the ancient city of Dan. It is also nearly impossible to get into the Holy Land from the Ur of Chaldees, the way Abraham went, without going by this city.
Yes.
They actually call it now Abraham's Gate.
They don't know if he went
the chances-
through it, but they went near it.
And if he pursued the kings as far as Dan, they're pretty sure at some point Abraham entered this city, and it still exists. And I'm going to bring that in a little.
You're just walking along. and
Closer
all of a sudden you're like,
again.
what is that tent thing? And she's like, wait for it. We come around the corner. I'm like, oh, that's real? That
Yeah, I'm
was
going to
phenomenal.
talk a little more about this at the end. So, and then a little further along is more remains from the Israeli settlement of Dan, and just stuff all over the place. The architecture and the buildings, and man, there had to have been a lot of people. I mean, if you ever doubt how many, when it says there were millions of Israelites, there had to be. I mean, look at what they built. I mean, that's not 10 guys. That's 100 guys, 200 guys, hauling rocks and piling them up. I mean, there had to have been a lot of people. It's just amazing. From there, we continued north. Today, this city is called Banyas. It was originally called Panis because it was the center of worship of the god Pan. But now that Arabs control it, there's no P in their language, so the closest they could come up with was a B, so it's Banyas instead of Panis. We would know this place as Caesarea Philippi. When Herod Philip took over part of his father Herod the Great's kingdom, he built this city and dedicated it to Caesar. So it's Caesarea Philippi. And it became one of his capitals, but it continued to be a center of worship for the god Pan, and we're going to see the amazing temple that was there. But he also incorporated, because at this point, Rome had become not a monarchy, but a dictatorship, and Caesar Augustus had become emperor, and so you were supposed to worship the emperor because he was a god, so they threw some Caesar Augustus. It's crazy. Again, this is where the headwaters of the Jordan River flow. Amazing, beautiful, green, lush forest, delicious water, little
sheer
fishies
rock.
swimming all over the place.
Yeah, there's just this sheer rock cliff, and with all these things carved into it, and there's just water coming out from under it. So in a desert, in a place that's got this kind of terrain, as the water falls, it does seep into the ground, and kind of like if you've ever been around sandstone, it soaks in. Well, it's got to come out somewhere, so it just bursts out at the foot of the mountains, and so you can actually see that in these places. It's incredible.
You're just looking at rock and dirt, and there's water coming out of it. It's crazy. Just lush, green, beautiful everywhere. I mean, mostly you think of Israel, and all you think about is deserts, and that's part of the story, but
Yeah.
not all of it. There's beautiful, lush green. I don't know why anybody would settle in anywhere else, actually. This is part of the complex of the temple to the god Pan. One of the interesting things I learned on one of the trips was the origin of the word panic. It was believed that the god Pan would come up out of this hole over here and go out, and he had an affinity for human ladies. And so on nights when they thought Pan was out running around, everybody was in a panic. And that's the actual origin of the word. This is not made up. You can look it up. That's the origin of the word panic. It actually relates to everybody being afraid of getting accosted by the god Pan. And he was the human head and goat legs. He was a handsome fella. So
A lot of goats around this area.
they just cut right into the rock and made these reliefs, and this hole is where they would throw the sacrifices, sometimes animal, sometimes human, and they would throw them into this hole. Some legends have this being believed to be the gateway or the door to hell. They would throw the sacrifices in, and then just below this is where the water is coming out of the ground. And they'd throw the sacrifice in, and they'd watch, and if the water turned red, the gods had not accepted their sacrifice and things were going to be bad. And if the water continued to run clear, all was good. Another view of that, I've actually on one of the trips seen this filled with water in the bottom too. It's fairly dry this day, which is weird because of all that rain. And they just cut into the side of the mountain. And each one of these reliefs held some kind of idol or statue that they worshipped.
And there we are taking pictures of ourselves, worshiping ourselves.
Yeah.
The dichotomy was clear.
So I don't know how many more pictures, actually. This is another view of the complex. And, you know, one of the things that always hits me about visiting here, the work that these people did was exquisite.
Oh, my.
It was amazing. And it just breaks your heart to think that they put all this effort into worshiping an idol that couldn't help them, that couldn't love them back, that couldn't do anything for them. And how much effort are we, not into building buildings, but how much effort are we putting into our God? Mm-hmm. Look at how much effort they put into that thousands of years later, there's still pieces of it left. And some of it is so beautiful and so exquisite, you want to take it home. I think it's all cursed, so I won't. Yeah. But how much effort are we putting into our God? It really, really made me sad. Just exquisite work. And this is after thousands of years of decay. This is the ruins of the city of Banyas, which sat outside the temple. That was all the temple complex. So we had a teaching here, and probably the most significant mention of this city, and it may actually be the only one, is this is where Jesus took his 12. Mm-hmm. And this is quite some distance from Galilee. This was a hike. And he hauled them all the way up here. And at a center where false gods were worshipped, Jesus challenged his people, and he said, "Who do men say I am?" And they said, "Oh, John the Baptist come back to life, or Elijah," and he said, "Who do you say I am?" And Peter jumps up in one of his moments of true brilliance, God-inspired brilliance, and said, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Mm-hmm. He took them here at this center of worship of other gods to show how different he was, and then ask them, "Who am I?" And that's the question for all of us today. And don't be fooled. This world is filled with idols all around us. Yeah. All around us. They may not be carved stone and wood, but we're all worshiping something. Is it Jesus? Who is Jesus to you? This is an incredibly significant place. And his response, when Peter made his declaration, this is Peter, stone, and on this rock, this idea, this concept of Jesus as the Messiah, the Son of the living God, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Right there at a place that was believed to be the gateway to hell. He took them there and he challenged them. And who do you say I am? And Jesus made this incredible declaration. And maybe you've heard this, maybe you hadn't, but by the way, gates are not offensive weapons, they're defensive. So if the gates of hell are not going to prevail against us, it's because we're going against the gates of hell. Hell's not coming against us. We're going against it. We're tearing down that gate. We're going behind enemy lines, and we're pulling people out. And that was the setting for this story. And when you see this setting and you stand there and you remember this story, it just takes on incredibly new significance to see the setting where Jesus told this story. It's amazing. This is a wild pomegranate tree. Pomegranates feature all over in the Bible. So many of the instruments of the temple, of the tabernacle, all included pomegranates. And these things just grow wild all over the place. And it's kind of a wild-looking orange flower. I don't know how it's going to show up in the picture on the wall, but it's this kind of like waxy, fleshy bulb that just pops open and flowers come out. And there was actually some dead kind of not want to eat right now pomegranates on the ground because they'd obviously been there a while because they're flowering. But it was so neat. I didn't see this on my previous trips. I must have been there before the pomegranates were blooming. But a beautiful flower. And again, you read pomegranate in the Bible and you know, why'd they choose that? And God was relating to them.
Yeah.
This was something they could see around them every day.
And they're
He was
everywhere.
taking things from their environment and incorporating it because he created it all. It's all his. And so
And if
well,
you've
not
ever
biblical.
if you've ever had Palm Wonderful.
Yeah, I kept waiting for the samurai to come up.
You know how good pomegranate juice is for you. And it's just filled with vitamins and antioxidants. And those were like words that they didn't necessarily have then. But God was showing them in his own way what was good for them, what was bad for them. So with all the laws and things that you read in the Old Testament that don't seem to have any bearing on us today, it was his way of showing them what was healthy and what was unhealthy, what was good and what was bad. And so by having these pomegranates as part of everything, it was like, these are very good for you. So yeah, and there was pomegranate juice stands everywhere. It's awesome.
So while not directly a Bible story, from Banyas, we traveled further north through the district of Golan, and boy, these Jewish guys, they hide military bases all over the place. You never know when you're just going to be cruising down the road and there's suddenly 20 M1 Abrams tanks lined up, and barracks and bivouacs, and it was cool.
Get your attention.
And it makes you feel safe too. Yeah, if anything's happening, they are ready. Now, I drove Heather crazy taking pictures. No. How many of you read the Psalms and heard about the bulls of Bashan? For years, I have been perplexed. What is a bull of Bashan and who cares? I couldn't even figure out, and the tour guide finally straightened it out. What we call today the Golan Heights area of Israel was originally called Bashan. Golan was a city within the district of Bashan, and it eventually became the name of the whole area. This soil is incredibly unique. The topography is incredibly unique. What you can't see under the long plants is there are rocks everywhere. These are ancient, extinct volcanoes, and there's these basalt rocks everywhere, and the stuff has grown up over them, and everywhere you go, I think there's a ridge there. You know, the people, when they settled the land, the first thing they do is they start pulling rocks out and pulling rocks out. One of my trips, somebody told a joke that God sent a couple of angels, 3 or 4 angels out to spread rocks all over the world, and one of them was lazy and dropped them all in Israel. So these bulls, they have to maneuver through all of these rocks and up and down these hills. I thought some of them, the places we saw them eating, that they were part billy goat because they were just on all four. And so
huge.
they're huge, and all of this walking builds up this huge muscular, and they're just the bulls of Bashan. And then it being volcanic, the soil is so incredibly rich, and so they're eating all this heavily mineral-rich plant life, and the bulls of Bashan are meaty and big and powerful, and that's why God uses them. And So I was just slightly fascinated with this because it's been one of those questions in my head for a long time. Bulls of, who cares? Now I know why, and I think I care. So it was very cool. We have way too many cow pictures. I've only included 30 of them. So from there, we made it up to the Golan Heights, the farther. In fact, this is where the video, the first part of the video that Chaz showed last week was taken from. This is the site of a battle in Jewish history. The Jews had gotten a little complacent. They had been kicking everybody's butt for so long, and they got caught flat-footed one time, and God still delivered them, but they lost a lot of people. And one of the most amazing tank battles in history happened in these fields. They call it Valley of Tears. They've left hulks of tanks just there as a commemoration. In the distance, that's Syria, where all those bad things you're hearing about in the news are happening.
We could see it.
We could see it. Even with the clouds, you could see it. Another tank off in the distance, and some fortifications that they had built that have been left behind. What? Oh, okay, I was told I could go. All right. I don't know. We might have to cut it off. Is anybody bored? Okay.
Better get a hot date that they gotta get to.
Yeah. That village that you see in the distance is Syria.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And then this is a fortification left over from that war.
Oh, that was a little disconcerting.
There are still active minefields. They have them barbed wired off and nice yellow signs.
Everywhere.
This is David. He was one of the tour guides, and he was actually a tank commander in the Israeli Defense Force, IDF. And he really gave a very moving retelling of some of his experiences, and that the Jewish people as a whole really deeply desire peace, which unfortunately is not going to come until the Prince of Peace comes. But it was very moving. From there, we traveled back down to the Sea of Galilee, which was kind of our operating base. This cliff, and this is where we actually took our second part of our video that we sent last week. This is the place where Jesus cast the legion of demons out of the man and into the swine. And they're positive that this is the place. If you go around the topography of the lake, this is the only place where there is a sheer cliff that drops off into the lake.
Every place else is shore.
It also fits because the city of the Gadarenes was just up the way. There were caves. These are the caves where the demoniacs were living and hiding, and we had a great teaching there.
Yeah.
And right there, landmines.
Yeah.
This is the dichotomy in the nation of Israel.
Sonny's standing here teaching, and right behind him is the landmine sign. It was a little real.
Yeah. That night, this is in the hotel. Two of the people that were on the tour, the guy sitting down there is Sonny Sandoval, who's the singer of band POD. And the guy in the middle there with all the ink, Heather will point him out, is Austin. And he was the singer for the band of Mice and Men. And they put it out on social network that they were going to be in town at this hotel, and any of the fans that wanted to come did. And
They were there
about
all night.
10, 12 kids showed up, and they got to sit and share their faith with them for a couple of hours. It was amazing. They did this again when we were in Jerusalem, and so there was a little two-way thing. We were pouring out into some people as well. So
Yeah, he's got a great story.
yeah, both of them do.
Awesome. Yeah.
Next day, we made it to Bet Shean. This place is amazing. This was one of the 10 cities of the Decapolis. The demoniac, he wanted to follow Jesus, and Jesus said, "No, I need you here." And he became a missionary to the 10 cities of the Decapolis. The demoniac preached Jesus in this town. It's really an amazing city, a true Roman city with an amphitheater, bathhouses, and this city goes way back to pre-Roman times. That big mound in the back, that's a tell. It goes all the way back to the Egyptians. The Egyptians at one point occupied this land. When Jonathan and Saul were killed on Mount Tabor, this is where they took their bodies back to, and they hung them from that tell.
Yeah.
And then the one people that Saul had done good to came back and stole their bodies and took them back and gave them proper, or at least a burial where they couldn't be exploited for enemy purposes.
It's funny, you think shopping malls are a modern thing? It's not at all. As we went down in here, the big colonnades, you can actually see the partitions, and in fact, in one place, did you put in that picture of the advertisement on the sidewalk?
No, I don't think it did.
There's a giant advertisement on the sidewalk to come into the shop.
Eat it,
It's
Moe's.
all in tiny little mosaic stones. So they were all little storefronts all along there. So you would come into town and, you have the baths and you have all these amazing places and the amphitheater and then all these places that you could shop. And it was still there. I couldn't read it because it was in Greek, but she told us what it said on the
I
on the
think it was
sidewalk.
Eat at Moe's, but
Huh?
Eat at Moe's.
Eat at Moe's. It was awesome. I
Either
just
that
can't
or
believe
Kilroy was here. This is the amphitheater where we gathered for a teaching. That's most of the 200 that were with us.
That was awesome. We had people as far away from Australia on this trip,
Yeah, Australia,
It's pretty amazing.
Florida, the Carolinas.
all over the country.
That's looking back towards the amphitheater. That would be the backstage area of the amphitheater where all the rock stars hang out. And from there, we traveled to the Heron Springs. You would better know it as Gideon Springs. This is where Gideon took the men to see if they would lap the water or drink it out of their hands. We had a great teaching here.
You could actually see the water bubbling up. You could hear it coming up out of the rock.
And everybody said that was unprecedented. They'd never seen it like that.
Never
But all
seen
the rain we'd had was just pushing the water through. And they've taken that water and it made it into a little water park. And it was Shabbat. And so all these Jewish families were there with their kids in diapers, screaming and yelling and having a good time.
It was beautiful.
From there, we went to Yardenit and had baptism on the Jordan River. Yardenit is the place. In 2000, there was a big push for people to go to the Holy Land because of the millennium and all this stuff. And at that time, John's baptismal site on the Jordan River, which is much closer to the Dead Sea, was really sketchy, and whether or not people would be able to get there to get baptized. And so a bunch of evangelicals got together and contributed a bunch of money, and they built this place, which is just south of the mouth of the Jordan River as it comes off of the Sea of Galilee.
It's beautiful.
They have these mosaic tiles all around with the scripture and it's in every language you can think of.
There were probably at least 200 of those in every language.
Every language you can
languages I've
think
never
of.
heard of. It's phenomenal. Hi.
One of the original founders of this, one of the guys to quickly step up and I think contribute $20,000 was Pastor Chuck Smith, our Pastor Chuck Smith. And there's an olive tree planted in his memory at the site. And I'm almost positive that white-haired, bald head is Pastor Chuck Smith. And that's the picture as you walk into the baptismal site. They have it all set up with gates and ramps and
Stairs and
and
beautiful.
I had the awesome privilege of getting to baptize my wife in the Jordan River. It was quite a moving event.
That's pretty awesome.
After a really long ride after that, we wound up at the Dead Sea, and we got there, and this is nighttime. That glow on the water, that's the Dead Sea in the background. That's the moon, not the sun. Had a beautiful, brilliant full moon that night.
Not a brilliant
When you're a
scholar.
Jewish sign maker and they want you to put English subtitles and English is your second language, I thought perhaps they were warning that there was a smoothie maker ahead. The next morning we got up and made it to the Sea of Galilee for the Dead Sea for the sunrise, which was incredible.
That was us.
You can see people floating on the Dead Sea. From there, we started moving north, up out of the Dead Sea. This is the cable cars up to Masada. There's not a whole lot of biblical history here. The sole connection to the Bible is this palace was built by Herod the Great. He was in league with the Romans, but he never really totally trusted them because he was a loon and he never trusted anybody. And so he built this castle in the desert on this high plateau, and there's just this one little path. They call it the snake path that winds up, and just this incredible complex up there. It became well known because in 70 AD, Titus came in and wiped out Jerusalem. The last of the zealots fled to Masada, and they gathered up there and made a last stand. And because there was only this one little path up, 2 or 3 Jewish soldiers, zealot soldiers, could keep off the whole entire Roman army. And then at night, when there wasn't fighting, they would go down and carry out raids on the camps, and the Romans were not happy about it. So they got together, and again, slave labor.
Yeah.
They
That's
built,
The
I
last
think
one,
I have a,
you could see the Dead Sea out in the back on that.
yeah, this is all overlooking the Dead Sea. So I believe at this point, they just got a bunch of slaves together and they started hauling rock in, and they built a ramp all the way up the side of the mountain. And as they got close, the Jewish people there knew that this was it. And so a couple of men killed everybody else, and then one guy killed all them, and then he killed himself, so that when the Romans finally got there, there was no victory. And they regularly take IDF soldiers up there to kind of reinforce this message that we will never again. We will die on our feet rather than live as slaves.
Yes.
From there, we continued north to En Gedi. This is the oasis. I mean, this area around the Dead Sea is the most godforsaken desert you have ever seen. I know no place is really but you would think so looking here. And then in the middle of it, there's just this strip of green that runs down, and there's all these animals and ibexes and these little groundhog-like things.
Beautiful waterfall. That you,
You can see that up in the top there.
in the middle of the desert.
And this is where David spent his time on the run from Saul. There's caves further up. He had water. God provided for him in the middle of nowhere. It's also in these caves that Saul found his way to use the ancient loo. And so many things happened here. And it's beautiful. We didn't get to hike up to the waterfall, and I was bummed about that. But I got over it, sort of.
Sort of.
From there, we continued north to Qumran. Qumran is where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. This was hugely significant. The Dead Sea Scrolls predate what, up to that point, was the oldest known manuscript of the Old Testament by 1,000 years. We suddenly leapfrog backwards 1,000 years in time with, and one of my favorite parts is the one book that they found almost entirely intact.
Really intact.
Was the book of Isaiah. The one book in the Old Testament that most speaks about Jesus. And the difference between what they found and what we have is inconsequential. The Bible jumped back 1,000 years, and what we have is accurate.
Absolutely accurate. That was phenomenal. And it was found by a complete fluke.
I've talked about the Essenes in some of the teachings recently. This area was run by the Essenes, and they were really devout. And, you know, when they're writing the Bible, they got to take baths every time they write the name of God. And so there's all these baths all over the place. And that is the actual cave number 4, where they found the majority of the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's a close-up. A desert goat herder boy was looking for a lost goat and thought it might be in the cave, and he threw a rock in the cave to scare the goat out, and he heard something break and went in and found these pottery with the Dead Sea Scrolls in them. So finally, we made it to Jerusalem. This is the view from the Mount of Olives of the old city of Jerusalem. Down here is the Kidron Valley. Over there is the Valley of Hinnom. The Gold Dome is the Mosque of Omar. Unfortunately, the Temple Mount is in the hands of pagan idolaters. They claim they're not pagan, but Allah was, anyway. Sad. This is some friends. I don't know why I threw that in there. This is looking back up where that picture was taken. All down the face of the Mount of Olives is graves. They know that when the Messiah comes back, he's going to come here. Even the Jews know this. And so they figure if they're there, they'll get resurrected first. And, you know, they want to get in early, so they get buried on the Mount of Olives. We're going to skip this. This is the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus spent his agonizing hours before the cross. These olive trees that are in here are just ancient. This is the Church of All Nations. It's part of the Garden of Gethsemane complex. Beautiful mosaic tile work up on the. This is the stone that some believe Jesus actually knelt and prayed on that night, and it actually goes up into the church. And there's that is the eastern gate, the King's Gate. The prophecy is that Jesus will enter that gate when he returns, and so Suleiman the Great said, well, we can't have that. So he boarded it up, which also fulfilled prophecy.
Right.
And then they put a bunch of graves in front of it because no good Jewish boy is going to walk across the grave to get into a door. They try to stop God and fulfill prophecy.
Right.
It's awesome. This is the Valley of Hinnom. Bad things happened here. This is the entrance to the southern steps of the temple. We talked about, I mentioned there are some places where we think things happen and other places where we know things happen. These steps are one of those places. These stones were here at the time of Christ.
From the actual originals.
The actual original stones. when people taught in the temple, they said they taught in the temple. It wasn't actually in the temple complex. Many of the rabbis sat out on the southern steps, and their students gathered around them, and they taught. This is where Mary and Joseph found Jesus with the rabbis when he separated, when they'd come up for the feast. Jesus was here. Jesus taught here. That stone that we're stepping on is a stone that Jesus walked over. It happened. If you go to Jerusalem just randomly and ask any random guide to take you to some place that Jesus was, this is where they will take you.
Yeah.
Southern steps of the temple. This is an original street from the Herodian era temple. There were shops along here. Incredibly high probability that Jesus walked here. From here we went to the city of David. This was the original palace of King David. This is the valley opposite the view. David was sitting in his room and looked out in Bathsheba, all these open rooftops. He was looking across this valley. From there we went into Hezekiah's tunnel, went through, which ended at the pool of Siloam. This is where the man went and washed the mud off his eyes and could see. There's several stories prominently linked to the pool of Siloam. We then went through the tunnels that go along the western wall. It's not an actual wall of the temple. It was a wall of the retaining wall of the temple complex.
I had no idea there were tunnels under there.
And they've tunneled all along it, and there's a whole lot of stuff we could go into. This is one massive stone. They still to this day have no idea how they got this gigantic stone.
Like 72 feet long?
Yeah, it's
It's ridiculous.
incredible. It's incredible.
It's ridiculous. Underground cities. I mean, seriously.
And this is, they tunneled, in that tunnel, this is a Herodian era, Herodian temple era street. Jesus very well could have walked here. From there, we walked the way of the cross, the Via Dolorosa, which included the sanctuary of flagellation. There's like 14 stops. It ultimately ends at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is believed to be the stone where they laid Jesus' body after his death. Under this altar is a hole.
Can see a lady bending down underneath the altar there.
And that hole is where they believe the cross was placed. And why you'd put an altar over it, I don't know. And so everybody's crawling down there to try and stick their hands into it.
Very
And
interesting.
this is, originally this was a cave, and somebody had the bright idea of cutting the top of the cave off and then building something over it. I have no idea why. And so there's this little building, and in there is just the tomb bed that Jesus' body laid on, which recently they've excavated and done some work on, and all the dating came out perfectly. Another view of that. And this is the ceiling over it with the light just streaming in. When it's cleaned up, it's just amazingly beautiful. From there, we went to St. Anne's Church. And the acoustics in this place is just amazing. This is about a minute long. We all got together and said, oh, you're not going to be able to hear this because I'm not hooked up to the speakers. Never mind. Sorry.
We all got together and sang Amazing
Well,
Grace.
we all got to, yeah, it was awesome. I was hoping to play
Phenomenal.
that. But this is the pool of Bethesda. This is where the men who were laying outside for 38 years was healed. And as they were digging down in here, archaeologically, they've gone back to the time when the Jebusites owned the city, and there was this tradition of healing. The Bible talks about the myth of the angel coming and stirring the water, and Jesus came here to make a statement that the false gods that you believe in that can't do anything for you, I can. We're running out of time. I don't want to keep you too much longer. From there, it was to the garden tomb. the Orthodox and the Catholics believe the Holy Sepulchre is the site, and frankly, when you look at the city and such, that's most likely the spot. But the evangelicals don't have a part of it, so they found this spot, and they think this is the spot. And it's a nice spot, and it's not so much important where it happened as what happened. And both of the tombs are empty. This is the inside of the tomb. And there's nothing really significant after this point, so I think we'll kind of cut it off here. Yeah. Yeah, we got a whole lot more pictures. So I kind of wanted to, and I'll try and do this quickly, if this thing will cooperate. Why does all this matter? Why is it important? I'll give you two questions and then hopefully a takeaway. Question one, why care about Israel? Because God cares about Israel. Genesis 12:3, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth should be blessed. When God makes a promise, it's a promise forever. He doesn't take it back. God promised to bless those who bless Israel. If we bless them, we will be blessed. It's important. And if you don't believe it, I think we can all agree that Satan hates anything that God loves. Satan has gone to a great deal of trouble to try and wipe out the Jewish people. Prior to Jesus, pick a time. He was constantly trying to wipe them out. And even afterwards, after Jesus, he's still been trying to wipe them out. If he wiped them out before Jesus, there is no Jesus, because he coming from the Jews. If he wipes them out after, if there's no Jews, there's no reason for Jesus to come back, because Jesus is coming back to bring his people to him. We get this amazing period of grace, the age of Gentiles. God's coming back to settle things with his Jewish people. We should care about him. And you know, we're all Jews. Paul talked about us being grafted in where the wild olive branches grafted into the tree. We're all Jews. Salvation is of the Jews. And when we come to Jesus, we become part of the Jewish covenants. So caring about the Jews is really caring about ourselves. Why care about these, question number 2, why care about these ruins and ancient artifacts? It proves the Bible is true. The Bible can be trusted. They're constantly, especially since the 1800s, the age of the higher critics, they have been constantly trying to disprove the Bible. 3 of the examples we saw. David, for years, the higher critics, the critics of the Bible have been trying to say there's no proof that David ever existed. David is a myth and a fairy tale like King Arthur in England. He didn't exist. And then they found the city of David. And then they're like, well, that could have been anybody's castle. And then they found this little room, and it was the document room. And it was all these papyrus documents. And they would seal documents in those days with a big slab of clay, and they'd put it on the edge, and they would take their signet ring and stick it in there. And then the scrolls got put into the archives, and well, that caught on fire. And while the papyrus all burned up, what happens to clay when it gets fire? It turns into stone. And they found all these little stones with the signet rings of all of David's ministers, all of the people listed in the Bible. They have proof that they existed. For years, Mary Magdalene is one of the most prominent figures in the New Testament. She's everywhere. For years, critics have said she doesn't exist because there is no city of Magdala. About 20 years ago, they started putting up a hotel, and what did they find? The city of Magdala. And finally, probably one of the best examples was the Pontius Pilate stone. For years, they said Pontius Pilate doesn't exist. We have proof. All of this is proof that the Bible can be trusted. It's real. It happened. These aren't fairy tales. These aren't myths. Our faith is backed up not just by the word of God, but by historical fact. God knows our frames. He knows we're physical creatures. He's left behind proof that his word is true. That Abraham gate that you saw, it's made out of mud brick. They had to put that tent over it to keep it from washing away when it rained. Do you know what a miracle it is that that exists? That is the hand of God ensuring that we have tangible proof that his word is true. And finally, a takeaway. I think Israel committed two great sins. The first one was after God brought them into the land, they went whoring after other gods. And God judged them and took them into captivity, and they never again worshiped other gods. Their second sin, after they were restored to their second great sin after they were restored to the land, was that they never became the blessing to the rest of the world that God had intended them to be. They completely turned inward. They took God's blessings in, and they never let it flow out. And we had kind of a great example of that. You've got the Sea of Galilee up in the north, and there's water pouring into it and water flowing out of it. And it's beautiful, fruitful, amazing land. But at the other end, you've got water flowing in, and it never flows out, and it's become toxic and deadly, and there's no fruit. The lesson I'm taking away from this trip this time, Pastor Rawl talked about it. We're witnesses now. We've seen these things, and I have an obligation to share it and tell people about it. And you may not have been to Israel, but each and every one of you have seen what Jesus has done in your life. You've seen what Jesus has done in other people's lives. You've seen the blessings that he's poured out. We're witnesses. We have to take these blessings poured into our lives and pour them out on others. I hope you enjoyed this. If you'd all pray with me. Father, we thank you that you are amazing, and that you give us your word, and you go the extra mile, and you give us tangible proof that your word is real and true and awesome. And Lord, just put a fire burning in our heart to carry that witness out, to just let it flow. Lord, don't let us come in here on Sunday morning to be filled up, but let us come in to see who we can fill up. And if we get filled up when we're here, Lord, let it be so that we can walk out these doors and pour it out on somebody else. We love you. We thank you. We worship you. And all of this we pray in the name of Jesus. Amen.